Hi, everybody. Welcome to Always Forward with the dshaw. Today, I have an all-star lineup, and we're going to be talking about Node.js and the web platform. In the middle, I'm going to share a brief presentation, brief as I can be. I'm terrible at being brief. About Node.js and the web platform. I'm joined today by Tara Manisic.
Hello.
Jory,
Hello.
James Snell.
Hello.
So I'm going to go around the horn and let everyone introduce themselves. I'm Dan Shaw, dshaw, strategic advisor working with great companies like Nearform, Node Summit, and others to drive forward the state of Node.js and the web. Tara, do you want to go next? Sorry, on mute.
I'm Tara Manisic, TZ Manix on Twitter, and I am a developer advocate for Progress Software and a web Google developer expert, speaking mostly on like PWAs and JavaScript and the web. I'm also the director and the founder of the Cincinnati Women Who Code and the Cincinnati Node School.
Awesome. Jory?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jory Burson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Boku, and I also serve on the JS Foundation Board of Directors, as well as ECMA International's Executive Committee, where I work a lot with the TC39 group, now on the Code of Conduct Committee, which is awesome. And I run Boston JS here in Boston, Massachusetts.
Nice. James?
James Snell, work with a great company called Nearform. They pay me to work on Node Core all day long, so I get to have fun. I am on the Node TSC and have been responsible for things like introducing the WebWG URL parser and text encoder and other things from web platforms.
Awesome.
Core.
So to get everything started and get warmed up, let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning. And I apologize in advance because I'm going to seriously date myself in doing this. The web, where did you get started? So I'll start in reverse order and go with James.
If I can get it out of mute. Let's see. You want to go way back? I can date myself too.
I'm sorry.
What? Let's see. When did Tim Berners-Lee remember that? So, I was doing a lot of the early HTML stuff. I remember when JavaScript was invented, and playing around with that stuff. So. Going way back, I actually had one of the first Ajax applications in production back in like 1999, before Ajax was even a term. When the XML HTTP request was first emerging in IE, we actually had an application in production that was using it. So that was fun, So been doing web app stuff for quite a while.
And if I recall correctly, that XML HTTP request was actually using XML.
Yes. Yes. The original use case, we were passing SOAP messages back and forth.
Oh my God.
Nightmares.
Jory, how about yourself? You want to unmute again?
Yep. There we go. Okay. I'm actually a child of the 80s. And so, I first discovered the internet kind of along with everybody else when we started getting CDs in the mail, to like go online. And I lived in a small rural kind of community. I lived way out in the country. And so there wasn't a lot to do during the day. And I remember logging on to AOL and looking for this game to play about, this is really corny, but it's about like, it was horses. It was like a horse game. And you used HTML to like create a web page for your farm and like all of this sort of thing. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things where I wanted to pass the time and have you know, something to do during the day. And, you know, I started to learn HTML and CSS and all this sort of thing so I could play this horse game. And yeah, and like the rest is sort of history. You know, I just sort of kind of discovered it as a wonderful tool to do things that I wanted to do creatively, and I've been kind of doing that ever since.
That's awesome. Tara?
So I think probably around the similar time as Jory, because I was a dial-up kid and definitely was a Napster criminal, and yeah, that was on ICQ a lot. Yeah, so but I never like, I would mess around a little bit with making web pages, but it wasn't until I actually got into school for CS that I went back around to web development. Because they actually started us out on PHP, but I got into it anyway. But yeah, so that was my going through processing, which was MIT-based language for designers, got me into Java, and then Java got me into web development. So the normal way that people get into the web. Yeah.
Java. Oh man! So you know, like James, you know, 1994 time frame. I was you know, doing desktop publishing. You know, my main app of choice then was PageMaker, which is you know, some ancient history. My introduction to the web was PageMill, and it was the first WYSIWYG web editor, and you know, it attempted to make you know, doing stuff with the web as visual and interactive as PageMaker was. And I'm grateful to this day that I had a mentor at the time who was like, "Yeah, cool, cool story, dshaw. Go actually learn how to code it yourself. Not, you know, put the tool away. The tool's cool, but you know, learn how to craft the underlying code that was there." And you know, basically, I've slipped into the dark side of backend ever increasingly since. So an interesting question, you know, bringing it to the other end of our spectrum. You know, I wonder if in getting introduced to Node, if it's the web that brought you to Node. You know, it was definitely the case with me. I got to know Node because I was trying to do WebSockets like Tara with Java. And WebSockets in Java was horrific at the outset of the spec. And, you know, I found that, you know, now defunct Node WebSocket server that, you know, enabled me to finally get into this workflow of, I'm making, you know, this asset for the front end, this user experience, and then I can iterate in a meaningful way on the back end. And, you know, that wasn't the workflow of Java. It was, you know, a heavy workflow of like, you built a thing and you cobbled it together over many years. And finally you realized your thing, and then maybe you could do a web with it. But, you know, the ability, you know, and you know, it's continued to, you know, become increasingly the full stack reality. The ability to go back and forth between these two platforms and conceptualize that user experience just, you know, blew my mind, and you know, kind of didn't look back once I you know, had the opportunity to go do that.
my experience was a little bit different. I was actually working with the IETF groups, working on the standards side of things, doing a number of, like the patch, introducing the patch method, or there's a couple of headers and things. When I was doing patch, I was doing some early code checking. And there was this thing called Node that people were telling me was important. I was doing it in Java and stuff like that. I'm like, hey, you should go make sure it works. Hopefully this is better.
That's better.
Telling me that there's this important thing called Node that I should make sure the thing that actually works. So I tested, found a bug. It didn't work. That experience didn't go well. I walked away from Node not wanting to do anything with it, and then like a year or so later, IBM came and said, hey, we got a job for you since you did this Node thing once. Like, okay, so you're gonna do Node all the time. So I didn't come at it from the applications or actually building websites point of view. I came at it from a trying to actually make things work in the platform, and from that angle. So I actually don't have a lot of experience with building web pages, modern web pages and web apps and stuff. It's just nothing that I do.
There we go. I'll chime in and say that I came to be introduced to Node probably in 2012 or so, where I was sitting next to my colleague Rick at Boku, and he was doing all of these crazy things with robots, and I was like, oh, that's fun, like, how are you doing that? And he's like, oh, it's JavaScript. And I'm like, what? That's something that is accessible to me. I like from and I know we have a high school STEM class listening in today, and that the idea of like programming robots was something that just seemed like out of reach, and like I would need to have all of this CS education or whatever that I didn't have. I actually have a journalism degree, and so when he was like, oh no, it's just JavaScript, you can do this, like here, like, and he was working on Johnny 5, which obviously has just really grown so much since then. It just sort of opened my eyes to the world of what could be done with web programming languages, and that's really that was my gateway drug, I suppose.
Nice.
yeah. So I knew that I liked Java after doing a bunch of development for web stuff or JavaScript. I knew I was done with Java, but from working with so much with JavaScript and then finding out about Node being JavaScript on both ends, I got into it a bit. But at the same time, I was also I'm a non-traditional student and went back to school for CS, and I was getting into Ruby on Rails and Node simultaneously, and I was trying to make the decision. And I moved back to Cincinnati, Ohio, and found a meetup where they were talking about IoT with Node, and I was like, and it was Tessel. So I started getting into Tessel, and at that meetup, I met people who were running a place called Modulus that was platform as a service, using Node and Mongo, doing the mean stack. And I hit it off with the manager, Matt Hernandez, at the time, and ended up working there and just went full steam Node and gave up on Ruby on Rails. And I'm very happy about it.
That's awesome. Well, I need to let James go. James has to go hop on a plane. So, James, thanks for stopping in and say hi to everyone at the Diagnostic Summit. I'll stop by after I finish recording.
All right, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm sorry, everybody. I do have to try to actually catch a flight back to California. So,
Good luck. Warmer there.
Good luck.
Much warmer, no snow. This is good. All right, wow.
All right, James. Thanks a lot. All right, let me pull up our first sponsor slot. So today, Always Forward with dshaw is brought to you by Node Summit. Node Summit is coming in July. In July, from July 23rd through 25th, the foremost event around the business of Node. Really brings together practitioners and leaders in the space, individuals who have gone through the journey and that are going through the journey of digital transformation that Node is such a key part of. Will be there. And really excited about this year's program. We just opened the call for papers, so head over to nodesummit.com and you'll have a chance to get registered, and also if you want to submit a talk, it's a great opportunity to submit a talk. Interesting tidbit. This year we're considering incorporating a couple training days. So if you're interested in training, or if you're interested in offering training, skill building courses on full stack development with Node.js, one of the big things that we've heard from attendees is the desire to level up their skills. So we'll get you wired in. So today I'm going to share a little presentation about a little context of some stuff that I've been digesting around Node and the web platform. So let's dive in. First and foremost, we have JavaScript. JavaScript is the language of the web. Love it, hate it. Have ennui and framework trauma, all the other things. JavaScript's sort of constant evolution, visiting it, the platform of today. Back when James and I were starting with the web, we had a very much document-oriented web experience. The concepts, the DOM, and so much of the primitives of the web were built for the creation of and sharing of documents. And over these past 20 some odd years, the web has evolved from documents to a web of applications. So it's been really interesting to see the language of the web evolve to meet those needs. So that core language of the web and the evolution of Node and the increasing prevalence of using the web as a technology platform delivery choice has brought JavaScript to be the number one used language in the world. In large part, it's that tie to the web platform that's really made it what it is today. Since we're going back and touching on the history, it's interesting to note that server-side JavaScript has been around for a really long time. So back in the late 90s, we had on Netscape Enterprise Server the ability to write isomorphic or write our algorithms and in JavaScript. Capability was there, but the performance of JavaScript in that environment was just too poor to really justify it. And then we hit an interesting inflection point in the 2000s where a platform called Rhino was introduced. We talked about moving from Java to JavaScript. Well, Rhino was a JVM based JavaScript runtime. If you like starting up the simplicity of starting up today's Node, Rhino had all the joys of starting up a Java application server and getting all that stuff set up to finally be able to run some JavaScript code. And then in 2009, Ryan Dahl, the creator of Node.js, brought. He was actually looking for a high-performance I/O platform, and settled on an evented system. And JavaScript was the natural language of choice for an evented system. We view today's Node.js as a JavaScript language platform. But the JavaScript choice was not a direct choice, but a decision outcome of how do you align a language that really natively speaks events, and that happens to be JavaScript. So that reality of JavaScript was in total part due to the V8. So V8 is Chrome's JavaScript engine, JavaScript VM, and it was the are we fast yet battles between the browsers, between Internet Explorer, between Mozilla, Firefox, and Chrome that led to the V8 JavaScript engine, and that effort led to Node.js having a performant JavaScript VM. Node, for the entirety of its history and today even, is a platform for V8 JavaScript. It's powers everything that we do, and our JavaScript is really provided and defined by Chrome's V8 engine. Interestingly enough, the Edge, artist formerly known as Internet Explorer, team brought Node Chakra to Node, and came to the core platform of Node.js, and to get our VM working with Node. And we're like, absolutely. And thankfully, through that effort, we have this low-level binding layer to V8 and subsequently to Chakra. So Chakra, since Node is defined as this V8 JavaScript platform, in order to really understand what it had to deliver to work effectively with Node, the Chakra team essentially had to figure out what V8 needed to run Node. So the Chakra team built this compatibility layer, and that for the first time ever, just a couple of years ago, we were and the V8 team a set of tests and some bindings that allowed us to assert what Node's needs were. We complained and hemmed and hawed earlier when the V8 team would change their APIs and move stuff around that we depended on Node. But we really didn't have a leg to stand on because we didn't provide any tests. We didn't have anything that the V8 team could know that things were working as Node expected, and thankful to the team at Microsoft and the work that went into Node Chakra. We are actually now a first-class consideration in V8's release process, and V8 does not ship if it breaks Node. So that takes us to Node is here we are. 8 years in, and Node and the platforms around us, we have 10 million users in the Node ecosystem, and Node has really become this essential part of the web platform. So, as we look at how we can be good citizens and kind of take those learning experiences from, collaborating with, the VM teams and, the V8 team in particular, and providing them the tests, there are some really clear adjacencies to where, we can focus our time. So, there's the, JavaScript, language and spec. Node is not a browser. It's fairly low level system, and we are almost always loading things from a local context in a file system rather than loading stuff off the network. So we have different needs, and it's Node's responsibility to come into the evolving discussion around the JavaScript language, and share the context that folks need in TC39 to be able to adapt the web, adapt the language, adapt JavaScript to the evolving need of all the platforms. And while continuing not to break the web, and increasingly Node.js is asserting continuing not to break Node.js. So then, of course, there's the universe in of itself, the web platform. There's so many APIs that we use in web pages and in web applications that we need to be able to generate on the server and produce that on the web. And there are honestly a lot of the APIs that we use as JavaScript APIs are not in the JavaScript language spec. Things like what James mentioned earlier with the URL parsing spec. That comes from outside of Node. I forget if it's what WG or W3C off the top of my head, but that's that is a API that we're used to using in JavaScript, and it's important to be able to have that fidelity of experience as you move through the full stack. And finally, and kind of out of scope from this conversation, there's the evolving cloud native ecosystem. Node has been and is a developer tool, and the cloud native ecosystem is really evolving the way systems are deployed, and we as the Node community and the Node platform need to make sure that we are representing ourselves and the needs of the ecosystem to that group. We can't expect them to understand or be able to represent those needs on their own. So if you're looking at Node and where to plug into standards, with JavaScript we have TC39 under the ECMA group. Web, primarily we have the W3C, and things are moving over to quote unquote living standards in the WG, and the W3C process is just a bit too slow for the current state of the web and the rapidly evolving technology landscape. And then some of the other standards that we need to look at are through the IETF, ISO, ANSI, and of course we all emoji, so the Unicode Consortium as well. So a lot of surface area when we're talking about Node and web standards and contributing that the evolution. There's a lot of work to do to really cover the challenge. So where do we get started? How do we align that broader reality of Node and the web platform? So, I think one of the easiest ways, actually one of the hardest ways, but one of the most important things to align a node and the evolution of the web platform is the evolution of the encapsulation in front-end JavaScript with ES modules. So the module spec in the ECMAScript standard is drastically changing the way front-end development is done, and bringing that to a standardized and stable reality. The challenge with that is that Node already has a fairly not spec standardized, but a sort of passive standard with our usage of CommonJS. And we like the web, don't break our platform. So we're committed to our users and providing a stable experience. So there's a lot of work that's been done here. Lots of grumbles and complaints about MJS versus JS file format. But this alignment, this taking and evolving the Node.js platform and evolving the web platform, so we have a common packaging format with ES modules is going to go in an incredible way to continue this alignment of Node and the web platform. So not quite a standard, but really a sort of a reference point and a state of the evolution of the platform. So with ES7, the language spec introduces async await. Interestingly enough, increasingly, Node is the first proving ground for JavaScript language features. Right. So on the web, it's still important to deliver kind of lowest common denominator experiences to the least capable browsers. So end users have a great user experience. Like I always told my engineering teams, folks don't care that it's JavaScript on the back end. They're just there for the experience. But as authors and practitioners of JavaScript, we have these new capabilities with async await, and they're drastically changing the way we're writing code, both in the front end and in Node.js. So sharing that journey and making sure that those are not just going forward, good features that we adopt, but also we have a responsibility to not break Node and not break the web. So how are we going to ensure that backwards compatibility and align those things together? My early conjecture there is on Node, on the Node side of things, we need to move away from things like Babel as being a tool for transpiling for the future, and toward a way for us to ensure backwards compatibility. So in language supported versions, we would just go straight native, and as we try to support older platforms like Node 6. Then we would use something like a transpile step, or 6.4 and beyond as appropriate. Those tools that we've used to sort of look into the future, I think will be useful for us to look into the past and support those platforms. And finally, what WG streams? Streams is such a fundamental part of everything speaking of living standards, the stream spec inside of WhatWG introduces some of the concepts of streaming and streams to the front end. But unfortunately, they are totally promise-based and insanely anti-performant. So we cannot use, every primitive in Node basically backs up to streams as data is moving through the platform. And, we really need, streams to operate at a very low level. So with, aligning Node and, the evolving specs around streams, I think the best way for us to do that is to find a low-level standard, lower than the higher order streams that's appropriate for data, and have Node build a spec. We got to put in the work to really invest in standards and make sure that we're sharing that context with the rest of the web platform. So a bit of a call to action. We actually really need folks that are excited about engaging in the standards making process with Node. Bringing that context from front end to Node.js, fantastic. Or just as valuable, bringing that representation of the needs of server-side development to front-end developers that may view the web as primarily one that is defined as a browser-related reality. So great opportunity there for folks to get involved and to ensure that we have the openness and standards to continue to grow as basically one platform. Thank you very much. So Jory, so standards, huh? Easy. I can't hear you for some reason. Tara, can you hear Jory?
Yeah, it says that you're unmuted, but for some reason it's not coming through.
Jory, I recommend just refreshing real quick.
I will say, in waiting for Jory, I'm excited to hear her answer because I used to joke around that ES6 was called ES6 for how many years it took to release. So now that since then they switched to like the smaller deliveries so that we can get things accepted more like faster, and you can see that accepting more and more, like all your tables are saying are green. So I think it was such a great decision for TC39 to move to the smaller releases, and I think that worked great last year. So I think we're moving in a great direction.
No.
Is your headset plugged in? Can you plug in and take it out and plug it in again?
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So headset maybe. All right, just go without that then. There we go. Sorry for the technical difficulties there, but I missed what Tara was saying, but I agree wholeheartedly. I think the committee really has hit a great stride in terms of just moving forward on a schedule, and I think it creates consistency and a sense of like what to expect and all that from the broader community. And we really need that in order to be able to like continue to build on the platform, right? To be able to understand as businesses and developers, what should we expect from this group of people who are really, driving our tool in a big way. So, but you'd said, hey, standards super easy, right? Oh yes, totally. It's a freaking breeze. But it's also a really important thing, I think, to try and dig in and wrap your head around a little bit, because it does seem like perhaps maybe an impossible thing to kind of figure out, but there's really so much that these different groups have, these different constituencies have. And I think knowing, what work is being done in what places is really important for people to advocate, for what they need and what they want. So.
Well, you've been plugged into the standards process for so long, Jory. Where do you sort of follow that map? How do you map this, incredible universe? I picked up the thread from, my perspective around Node, and, kind of been, divining out from there, and have been very grateful that I get to ignore the DOM for by and large. So yay! But there's that whole ball of wax. Like how do you sort of keep the web in your collective?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and the answer is I honestly can't most of the time, right? And so it kind of started when I started getting like deeper into this world, into these different communities, and just feeling myself very lost and going, wait a second, like I can't keep any of this straight. Who's doing what? And like, why is this important? And, why does this matter? And that kind of thing. And so I started having a lot of conversations with different kinds of developers. I talked a lot with my colleague Wilto, Matt Marquis, who had his own adventures in the standards process. And of course, Rick and some of the folks who've been very instrumental in the TC39 committee for a long time, and folks from standards groups outside of the web as well. Just how does this work? And I read a lot, and I decided that what I needed was to kind of create something that helped me map everything and how these different groups are related, how they work together, what they're working on, and kind of why that's important. And so I made myself a little map, and then I eventually kind of published it, but I've got to update it. And I hope that's helpful to people. It certainly was a tool for my own education, but I did a lot of reading too about, the internet open standards process, development process, that kind of thing. And I realized that, it is technology, but it's also humans. It's a bunch of humans trying to do something big. And once that was like, oh, okay, yeah, then it was it's sort of been much easier for me to grok and talk about ever since that insight.
Joey asked a question. I don't know if you all saw that, but you two are probably really great people to ask about this, but how to get involved with this.
That is.
Yeah, well, let me start real quick with the back end side of things. If you're interested in plugging into Node and getting involved in kind of Node, connecting to that, I suggest going through one of the working groups. I'm currently in cold as Ottawa for the Diagnostic Summit, and one of the key underpinnings of what we're looking at is how we can have standardized debugging channels. So we have things like Chrome Dev Tools, we have the Firefox tooling, and Edge has its own platform as well, and then Node's tools. So if we can all begin to speak one dialect of debugging protocol, then we can carry the context of going back and forth between the ecosystems in single reality.
Yeah, definitely the working groups, I think, are a great place to start. And you can either, start there because you are passionate about, some particular technology, maybe it's SVG or whatever it happens to be. There's probably a working group for it. And in my kind of experience, a lot of them are woefully in need of help and enthusiastic developers who are interested in carrying a torch. So, the W3C, the Whatwig, and Node. All of these groups have ample opportunities for working group contributors, and if you can, yeah.
What week? I know.
Oh, yeah, that's what I.
Go collaborate with other communities and learn how they pronounce
exactly.
it. So Jory, you posted this great. If folks didn't see the link that Jory posted to the map of open web standards, I mentioned 3, 4, or 5, I guess, of the standards bodies. Maybe for those who are listening, what's missing? What are the key areas where activities happening that maybe I wasn't tuned into in the presentation? I mentioned. Okay.
So I think I always find it helpful to sort of start from like the lowest level and kind of follow up the trail, if you will, because you had a list of a bunch of different groups, and if to the uninitiated, you're like, what the hell are all these things? And like well, I have to know what all of these people think about a thing, and the answer is not really. But obviously your most foundational level, you've got your community or your working groups where practicing developers and sometimes people who are just very interested in language design and that kind of thing get together and really meet out a problem, and a lot of times those are folks who they're just interested, or maybe they're working for a browser vendor or something like that. They're working on an implementation themselves, so they've got some interest. And then from there, it kind of depending on whatever group that community or working group is associated with, it may be associated with a technical committee like TC39. That committee can and often does have other working committees that kind of report into it. That committee is oftentimes associated, a technical committee is often associated with a standards development organization, which ECMA International and the W3C are probably the ones that everybody would most be aware of. And the point of doing that whole process is so that you have an open standard that's developed, right? That it's not just a group of us who are saying, hey, this is the right way to do it, we think, but rather a body of people who are vetting, going through some stages to kind of ensure that this is really going to work. And it's not just what we would consider a de facto standard, which is one wherein everybody kind of more or less agrees that, hey, this is the right way to do it. We're all writing tutorials and, agreeing as a group that this is it. Like, it's sort of like those, it's like the de facto standards are really important, but they're more like the kind of unwritten rules, I guess, of development. And once the technology goes through an open standardization process, that's when it's actually getting written down. And I'm really excited to see Node go through that process, because it's certainly something that has grown from a de facto standard of a whole bunch of people, myself included, getting very excited about this technology. And now we want to, it's 8 years and it's growing up on it.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, and there are a couple areas that really stand out there. There's looking at the past, there's the CommonJS module system. We probably won't spend time there. We'll probably move towards the standard rather than trying to standardize that. There's simply how assets are put on disk inside of Node modules. And who owns that? Does Node own that? Does NPM own that? Does Yarn own that? Do we not care? In the end, the real velocity comes from when we don't have to make those decisions, when we get to a point of consensus and we don't need to go and figure out how we're going to put those things on disk. So Yarn 10 or whatever can just align to the standard, and it doesn't matter at that point who owns the thing, right? It's not who owns it. It's how are we ensuring the collective end users that they have a reliable and predictable path through the platform.
I'm going to chime in, and I put 2 links in there, and I just want to say how, like, with ECMAScript especially, and with the working groups for Node, a lot of this stuff is very transparent. So you can get involved even just by reading repos that have to go with all of these things and following along on development of ECMAScript proposals and stuff. So they're really great about being open and pretty transparent with the community so that you can follow along and really get involved in what's going on.
Yeah. And riffing on that, I think that's an inherent quality of the platforms, and one of the main reasons why I think that Node's really evolved to be in such deep affinity with the web platform. It's not just that it's JavaScript. It's not just that some of the same folks were involved in some front end projects and moved over to Node. I think the main reason that we are all sort of moving forward together is Node's openness. Node's one of the only open source projects out there, or one of the main ones that I know of, that it comes from a community. It's not corporate, throw over the wallware. It's this platform that grew up. We learned how from John Ressig. We basically learned how to develop in the open, on GitHub, and Node was born in GitHub, and it's incredible. As we were bringing Node into the foundation, and we had involvement from a bunch of corporate folks, and we're going to do a foundation-y thing. It really had to help folks understand that that the folks that are involved in Node have a violent sense of ownership to the platform, and if we go the wrong way to that, we're going to have we're going to hear about it,
which is great. It's wonderful.
Right?
And I was thinking the same thing before this. I was like, I was reflecting on the community. There was a lot of parallels in the evolution of the jQuery project, and I think Node has taken a lot of wonderful lessons from that, because it is a technology that has come from the developer community as opposed to from some corporate entity that's gifted this, right? And that those things have a different life cycle and they have a different progression, and so to see technology progress in this fashion is both exciting, perhaps a little bit more challenging, because you're talking about so many different constituencies who do feel they have that ownership. But also, I think the better progression for the technology in the long term, for sure. So it's super exciting.
Right. I mean, I think if you were to look at, read the tea leaves, look in the past, and would I invest in that would credibly be viable in 10, 20 years? I think it's even easier if you push that horizon out to 20 years. The web's the only one that I can think of that you could really invest in part because of our commitment to backwards compatibility. The web has to continue to work, and those funky old web pages from '94 still we don't want to break any of those experiences, but we want to evolve the web with new standards and new capabilities.
Well, that's a lovely thought, because sometimes I like to go back to my hometown pizza website that was clearly built in 1992, and I see it still working. And I'm wondering, what websites will I be visiting in 20 years to remember what everything looked like?
Speaking of, the Space Jam website from 1996 is also still up.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right, and you wouldn't get the ability to go and look at that. It'd just be like dead bits.
Right. Exactly.
I think it is. I think that does kind of bring us into the segue of like the advancement of the web and how it incorporates JavaScript in general. Because like I speak on progressive web apps a lot, and that they work a lot with kind of being progressive in a way that you're building upon something but not breaking anything by just doing, basically they're doing if checks to see if it's supported, and if it is, then continue to do the work on it. But one of the biggest things I say when I talk about progressive web apps is working with service workers is the big new thing, because you're working with push notifications and offline caching, but it's a JavaScript file. So it's like you're just making another JavaScript file and you're working with promises. So it's things, and I always say I'm a big advocate of JavaScript because I know how many things you can work on the web that are going into the future with JavaScript. But that's what I always say. It's like these huge, crazy things that everybody's talking about, service workers that give you all these amazing capabilities. It's JavaScript. Like, you know how to do this. It's JavaScript. So I think that's one way that we're seeing the web moving into the future hand in hand with building more JavaScript functionality.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and service workers are an interesting area. It's a theme. Service workers are, and progressive web apps, PWAs, are really sort of taking over the vanguard of how we build apps today. You can develop a PWA that downloads in moments. It's absolutely incredible to see the performance of a well executed PWA, and we have a high performance platform on the back end, but that is one of these core APIs to how front end development is being done. And where's that API on the back end, and does it even make any sense in Node? I am increasingly of the mind that it really does. It's going to drastically change the execution profile of Node. Node is like front end JavaScript is a single event loop. And we cheat a little bit on file system operations and have a couple areas where it's not really one event loop. We keep threads together, but an area where Node folks have chosen not to use Node because you have to solve it with system architecture. You have to spread apart the components. Is computational work. And you can do that sort of computational heavy lifting inside of a service worker, inside of a single Node instance, and that could drastically change some of the ways that we're doing things like server-side rendering of a page, puts that into a worker, and that gets it off the main event loop. That's the system architecture that you do with multiple instances of Node. Basically, you'd have an edge node, and then work gets pushed off to another service, which then calls back. But that model of service workers is that I think that we only been. Yes.
So it looks like we got another question from Nicolay. What about enterprise apps replatforming, the replacement Java to Node.js? How much can Node.js really replace JavaScript completely? That's interesting.
Or should it?
Should it?
And I think those are different questions.
In just for a reference point, you could. So I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, where Kroger grocery store is based,
right?
And they just in the past 2 years took everything, well, mostly everything off of Java and onto Node. And I think they have some stuff. I'll look for a link from their engineering team, but it's been really, they've done a ton of stuff, have a great team, and have been really successful with it. So it definitely can be done. So I'll give you that much.
Yeah, I mean, so Kroger, sorry, Kroger, but that's a pretty old school company. And if Kroger is, doing it and migrating, over to Node, absolutely. If what is it, Atwood's law? If it can be written in JavaScript, it will. And my goodness, have I seen some terrible examples of that. But I think there are additional drivers that are outside of the basic language choice. Right, it's becoming less a question of Java versus JavaScript. It's much more a question of fluency in web technologies, and Node is fluent in that platform. So if you're building this corpus of technology that is all using web technologies, then you're plowing through abstraction or on top of abstraction to write that stuff in Java that if it's close to the web, then really increasingly does not make any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, back in 2011, 2012 at Boku, one of the things that I was working on all the time is like training Java teams in JavaScript, because there were companies sort of coming to that realization, like, we need to just be working in the same, context everywhere. And, and I see fewer and fewer emails every year about that need, because a lot of people have already made that. A lot of companies have already made that switch. And it's not just, about the technology choices Dan said, but also about like the other very important business factors that these companies are taking into consideration, making the switch, and then thus kind of a lot of other things are following, because that's where the money and the business is. And so
great. I'm going to hold the question. I need to jump into my second little sponsor slide. Be right back. All right. So, today's Always Forward with dshaw is brought to you by Operation Code. So, Operation Code, absolutely fantastic, group of individuals banding together, individuals, serving in the military in the United States, and helping each other come out from service and into the job market. Oftentimes in working with institutional realities, maybe you don't get to use the latest and greatest technology, but entering the job force, you absolutely would benefit from being up to date with the latest stuff. So the team at Operation Code works with boot camps and other organizations to empower and really assist the servicemen and women and their families to make the most of the growing technology ecosystem. I'm very happy to share that on November 10th, on Veterans Day, we'll be back. So I participated last year at the first Operation Code Gala in Portland, Oregon, and I'll be back again this year. David Molina, CEO and founder of Operation Code, has invited me to be a chair of the gala event. So really excited to sort of support our men and women who served, and really grow the web platform together with these individuals. So I hope you'll join me. Have a bit of a good time, and apparently talking about dancing. That's going to be not a very good dancer. But it was a great time and a great opportunity to support the folks at Operation Code. All right. Well, back. Thank you. My goodness. So we got a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to ask, that we cap questions here. Thanks for all the great questions, but I do need to let both Tara and Jory get back to it, and I could stay and chat with them for the rest of the day. Seriously enjoy it. All right, so Eric has a question here. Request a simple API for WebAssembly on the server side. Interesting question. So will the, I think there's baked in there, will the API for WebAssembly be simple? And what I've seen so far of WebAssembly, or WASM, as folks like to abbreviate it, is that it's not simple. It's baking things down to assembly and low-level representation. Some of the background there with what was Brendan's what was Mozilla's pre-WASM thing?
ASM, yeah.
ASM.js was the thing. ASM.js, compiling things. Thank you, Bradley. Compiling things down to ASM.js was non-trivial. So while I think that Node will have it definitely will have WASM support. There are a lot of things to work through to make that a reality. Node as a server-side platform, the platform has native extensions that we can go directly to native code with. On the web, we intentionally sandbox everything just to protect the browser from executed code. So there's a lot in that sandbox that has to be worked through, that you don't want the same sort of bindings and level of access that Node has on the browser. And so as Node adopts those restrictions, we inherit that sandboxing. And that's probably going to be a useful tool, but there's a lot to work out. If we're just looking for another mechanism to execute native code in Node, we've got a lot more approachable, easier ways to do it today. Okay, and whew, you bet. Thanks, Eric. So, oh goodness. So Rafa asks, Node in serverless environments, are there improvements in platform focused on serverless, or they won't be necessary? How do you guys see the increasing adoption of serverless architectures?
That's a good question.
I feel like there is a lot more effort with Azure and AWS. And I mean, AWS has had a lot of focus on serverless node architecture for a while, but I feel like people are trying to do more and reach out more to the node communities to kind of bring more to what the users need for their serverless architecture. So it feels like there is a lot more focus on it, but I feel like I could also be in a bit of an echo chamber for that.
Yeah, I think that serverless is increasingly going to be a thing. It is it at once simplifies things while increasing complexity. It kind of move the blob by pushing one area and kind of move the complexity into another space. The complexity of systems is still there. One, there are servers in serverless. And one of the interesting surprises in serverless is when you have a lot of events going through. Some folks that have been involved in high throughput event processing. Talking to a developer at a company that did, ad tracking and, producing and verifying, ad unit usage. And, they started with a serverless approach and very quickly found out that at heavy usage, serverless is not as cost efficient. So it's there's a cost efficient beginning, but then I'll put my business hat on. You always kind of want an exponential curve as things go up, and there's an exponential curve inside of serverless pricing that really does ramp up if you're really getting to a point of heavy activity, and at that point you'd benefit from moving off of server and managing it. I think one of the I've actually been sharing some of the cloud providers. I think one of the areas that were gapped on in terms of technology workflows in the cloud space is how do you go from a serverless instance to a platform as a service instance to a full like Kubernetes mega orchestrated system. That I expect to be a workflow that end users will need, and the clouds are just getting to a point where they got the service up and like listening to users, but there's a journey of code that increasingly folks especially in groups with less IT budgets really see a lot of benefit in serverless. They don't have anyone to maintain their servers for them. Hi, Nike Digital. In those realities, serverless is a lifesaver because folks can get the tech that they need built in meaningful ways. But there's more to it than just the hype around serverless. It's a useful tool.
I think the journey from like going from that to Kubernetes is actually just writing a really large YAML file. Pretty sure that's all it is.
My nightmare.
But I will say that with the serverless architecture, I think a big thing that's kind of making people have to make hard decisions is how you're actually building your architecture. So if you're doing like a microservice architecture with a lot of messaging and like trying to communicate with all these services on your like cloud platform, the easier the cloud platform people can making those communication processes and management of all your services, I think that's what's really going to make the journey better or easier.
Right on. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up. Oh my goodness, this has been fun and great conversation. Thanks Tara, thanks Shori, and thanks James on plane for joining me today. We'll be back next month. So boom, and smooth transition to something that I'm sharing. No, I lost my screen. All right, next one. On the second Tuesday, March 13th, we'll be back here and back end front ends kind of define the early evolution of the Node.js platform, especially the platform adoption in the enterprise. And enterprise architects are tearing out those backends for front ends, the BFFs. So I'm going to bring together some folks from a bunch of different companies. So TELUS is a huge telecom company in Canada. Ahmed Nasri will join us. Trevor Livingston of HomeAway will join us, and Jason Mello of ADP. So ADP that does all the workforce stuff, and they're going to share their experience and the evolving infrastructures that make Node apps effective. So really excited about that, and hope to see you all next month.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.